All right, real quick. Which countries are closest to a cashless society? According to data from the World Bank, Norway is the European country closest to a cashless future, with Sweden in a close second place, the first European country to issue banknotes. Ironically, it looks to be one of the first to get rid of them. Merchants can legally refuse cash payments. Most Swedish banks don't handle cash transactions in branch, and ATMs are not particularly common anymore. Over 98% of Swedes own a debit card, and Sweden is one of the top countries for mobile payments. In the UK, the decline of cash takes on a self-reinforcing dynamic, i.e., fewer people use it, which means that banks feel able to close more ATMs, which in turn reduces the use of cash, and so on. Cashless societies present a challenge for inclusion and privacy. Cashless societies throw up issues of inclusion. For example, although the UK indexes highly for the number of people with a bank account, it's estimated that there are over 1 million unbanked individuals in the UK, mostly those on low incomes. Older people are more likely to use cash, and it's possible that as the cost of living continues to bite, we will see customers stick to cash as a way of managing spending. The decline of cash threatens to leave left behind individuals even further behind. Privacy concerns is another significant obstacle. Cash transactions provide anonymity, while digital currencies, both the issuer and the controller can track usage. Digital wallets can be disconnected if breaches are suspected or detected. Cash is also a tangible asset. The digital currencies are largely just numbers on a screen. And here's some of the most popular digital wallets globally, at least here in the United States. No, this is globally, never mind. As of 2022, Apple Pay, 507 million people use it. Google Pay, 421 million. PayPal, 377 million. Venmo and Cash App, 52 million and 36 million respectively. At least in the town that we live in, Venmo and Cash App are the primary uh, used payment methods for conducting local Facebook and Craigslist transactions from your neighbors. So what is a CBDC? CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, are digital currencies issued by central banks. Their value is linked to the issuing currency's official currency. So somehow the digital numbers on a screen has been related to a real dollar, a physical dollar value. When was the last time you paid with something with cold hard cash? COVID-19 pandemic with its cash shortages and hygiene concerns as people shift away from cash, many are increasingly turning to digital finance transactions. A variety of recent digital disruptions, including the emergence of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, digital currencies are part of this story, and central banks have started to take note. Central bank digital currencies are digital forms of a government-issued currency that isn't pegged to a physical commodity. I do not know how this makes them worth anything. They are issued by central banks, whose role is to support financial services for a nation's government and its commercial banking system, setting monetary policy and issuing the currency. At present, as of the writing of this article in March of 2023, 87 countries representing more than 90% of global GDP are exploring CBDCs. Jamaica's JAMDEX, or JAMDEX, launched in 2022. Nigeria, with its launching in October 2021. Sub-Saharan Africa is poised to adopt CBDCs as well. Project Aber of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates tested the use of a jointly issued digital currency as an instrument for domestic cross-border settlements between the two countries. Why have central banks become interested in CBDCs? Plummeting cash usage, growing interest in privately issued digital assets. European Central Bank says that as many as 10% of households in 6 large EU countries own digital assets. Consumer use of digital assets can be viewed as a potential challenge to fiat currency as a unit of measurement for value. Decreasing sense of central banks as payment innovators, CBDCs offer central banks a new opportunity to lead strategic conversations on cash use cases in a public forum. The uh, rising global payment systems, many central banks seek to establish greater local governance over increasingly global payment systems. There are potential benefits to establishing CBDCs, but they are not without risks. Some of the potential benefits are reduced costs. Financial service providers stand to save $400 billion annually in direct costs by shifting spending away from physical infrastructure and towards digital finance. An increased speed, CBDCs could improve the speed and efficiency of many countries' electronic payment system. This argument is becoming less compelling, as we'll see below. Greater access for those without bank accounts. Just under 5% of U.S. adults don't have bank accounts, and in 2016 there were 1.6 billion unbanked people around the world. All right, let's see. Is there anything else on this? Nope. You can read all these articles by pausing the video and looking up here at the address bar and going to each one of these yourself. This one is called What is Central Bank Digital Currencies? All this information is public. Here's another one for the FDIC, National Survey of Unbanked and Underbanked Households. 4.5% of U.S. households, approximately 5.9 million, were unbanked in 2021. No one in the household had a checking or savings account at a bank or credit union as part of this survey, or as part of this number right here, 4.5% of households. Some of the reasons for not having a bank account is not having enough money to meet the minimum balance requirements. Some don't trust the banks was the second most cited main reason. Uh, and avoiding a bank gives more privacy was the third most cited reason. COVID-19, the 2021 survey asked households whether they experienced economic changes since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Those changes contributed to the closing or opening of household bank accounts. 34.9% of recently banked households reported that receiving a government benefit payment, for example, unemployment benefits or pandemic stimulus payment, contributed to opening a bank account since March 2020. 21.1% recently unbanked households reported that losing or quitting a job, being furloughed, or having reduced hours, or having a significant loss of income contributed to closing a bank account since March 2020. The use of a bank teller declined considerably from 24.8% in 2017 to 21% in 2019 to 14.9% in 2021. But remaining prevalent among certain segments of the population, including lower income households, less educated households, older households, and households that did not live in a metropolitan area. 6.9% of households using general purpose reloadable payment credit cards, prepaid credit cards, or general purpose reloadable prepaid cards. 46.4% using non-bank online payment services such as PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App. Prepaid cards was the use of prepaid cards was much higher among unbanked households. So, how digital finance could boost growth in the emerging economies? This is a 2016 report. Delivering financial services by mobile phone could benefit billions of people by spurring inclusive growth that adds 3.7 trillion to the GDP of emerging economies within a decade. 2 billion of individuals and 200 million micro, small, and medium-sized businesses in emerging economies today lack access to savings and credit. Digital finance, payments and services delivered via mobile phones and the internet could transform the lives and economic prospects of individuals, businesses, and governments across the developing world, boosting GDP and making the aspiration of financial inclusion a reality. McKinsey Global Institute did a report as the attempt to quantify the full impact of digital finance. So you can go search up that report at McKinsey Global Institute if you want to read it. Mobile phones are the game changer, according to somebody in this article. probably the McKinsey Institute or whatever. In 2014, nearly 80% of adults in emerging economies had a mobile phone. Three building blocks are required: widespread mobile and digital infrastructure, a dynamic business environment for financial services, and digital finance products that meet the needs of individuals and small businesses in ways that are superior to the informal financial tools they use today. So, checkbooks and probably even debit cards are going to be, well, checkbooks are already a thing of the past for the most part, but even debit cards, it seems like, are going to be going the way of the dodo in favor of having everything done over the internet via your mobile devices, according to this 2016 study. I would say that we've made some strides towards that end since then. So Warren Buffett predicts how long the US dollar will remain a global currency. There's a lot of talk about this lately, with Russia and China and the rest of the world doing their shenanigans with whatever this GDP stuff is. I don't understand this global economy, and I really don't care, but it's worth talking about, maybe. So Buffett predicted in 2015 to Business Insider that the US dollar would remain supreme and reign in the international markets for at least the next 50 years. And he's quoting, I think the dollar will be in the world's reserve currency 50 years from now, and I think the probabilities of that are very high. Nothing is certain, but I would bet a lot of money on it. I think China and the United States will be the two super economic powers, but I think it's extremely unlikely that any currency supplants the US dollar as the world reserve currency for many decades, if ever. So, will the US dollar be dethroned? This is a article on Charles Schwab. This is in April of 2023. There has been a long-term trend towards currency diversification in global financial transactions and trade, but we don't see the US dollar losing its dominance anytime soon. De-dollarization has become a hot topic in financial publications. It appears to stem from the news that China is beginning to use the yuan in commodity trades with a handful of trading partners, and Brazil and Argentina are exploring the potential for a common currency. I'm pretty sure one of China's partners is Russia, as well as people in the Middle East. So our view is that this argument is overblown. According to Charles Schwab, they think this argument is overblown. The leaders of the World Economic Forum think that this argument is overblown. While the dollar has declined over the past 6 months, it remains close to a 10-year high versus currencies of countries with which U.S. trades. There's a bunch of graphs here. You can go, again, look up any of these websites. This is schwab.com. Will the US dollar be dethroned? Check it out if you want to read it. Here we're moving on to Investopedia, profiting from a weak US dollar. After strong and steady gains through the late 2010s, the value of the dollar relative to other world currencies has been gradually weakening since 2020. A strong dollar is generally a policy goal of the United States. A weaker dollar, however, can be good for exporters, making their products relatively less expensive for buyers abroad. Investors can also try to profit from a failing dollar by owning foreign currency ETFs or investing in U.S. exported companies. A weaker dollar is often accompanied by higher inflation in the U.S. and or an economic downturn. Up and away, the price of commodities related to the value of the dollar and interest rates tends to follow this cycle. Interest rates are cut. The gold and commodity indexes bottom. Bonds peak. The dollar rises. Interest rates peak. The stocks bottom, and the cycle repeats all over again. Is America in a decline? So this is an article from 1992 by Harvard Business Review. A nation once celebrated for its Irrepressible optimism now appears to be obsessed by decline. America's list of complaints seems endless. Real wages are falling, productivity growth is down, companies aren't competitive in global markets, white collar jobs are no longer secure, the nation's infrastructure is collapsing, the federal deficit is soaring, the health system is deteriorating, the cities are unsafe, the schools are failing, and the gap between the rich and poor is widening. I would say that these are pretty well all on point in 2023. Preoccupation with decline that so pervasive is the preoccupation with decline that it has given birth to its own school of thought. Call it declinism, is the idea that something is fundamentally wrong with the United States economy. Until it is fixed, America will never compete effectively in global markets nor provide an adequate standard of living for its citizens. The real issue isn't decline so much as increased equality among advanced industrial nations. Concern about the decline are a symptom of the growing equality among industrialized nations rather than a reflection of any fundamental problem with the U.S. economy itself. The real issue isn't decline so much as increased social inequality at home. The very economic changes that have led to increased equality among industrial nations have also served to increase social inequality within American society. Much of the concern about the U.S. Economic decline is really concern about the socioeconomic implications of increased social inequality. The equality of nations, the version of declinism most familiar to managers, can be found in the by now abundant literature on competitiveness. Declinists compare U.S. economic performance with that of the nation's chief rivals, usually Japan and Germany, and find it wanting. Second, they urge the United States to become more like its competitors, primarily by copying Japanese and European mechanisms for business government collaboration. The chief measure of competitiveness is a nation's ability under fair market conditions to produce goods and services that meet the test of international markets while simultaneously maintaining or expanding the real income of its citizens. According to competitive economies, the United States fails on both counts. It fails the living standard test because the real wages of manufacturing production workers have fallen since the 1970s. Some of the decline in the U.S. share of international markets was inevitable, given that the United States began the post World War II economic race as the world's wealthiest nation. Europe and Japan were bound to catch up in the process, and in the process, undermining the U.S. economic hegemony. The United States spent much of the past 30 years making sure that exactly this process took place. U.S. policy objectives, plainly stated, were to fight communism by planting the seeds of capitalism's success, and to expand trade, goals that would presumably benefit the United States. Now that the policies have succeeded, declinists wish to use an entirely different measuring stick to declare them failures. While the data designed to prove America's economic decline are mixed quality, there is nevertheless an intellectually interesting link between global competitiveness and decline. This is the intersection explored by MIT economist Lester Thurow, and he makes two related claims. First, changes in global competition are bringing the United States into more direct confrontation with its main economic rivals than was the case in the past. Second, the new rules of global competition put Anglo-Saxon capitalism at a distinct disadvantage. Many Americans grew up simply assuming that the U.S. made products were and would continue to be the best in almost every industrial sector, an assumption that could remain true only until other countries began to prosper. And the new reality was made even more painful psychologically when the Japanese so swiftly and unambiguously came to dominate automobiles, an industry that correlates so closely to the American sense of self. In the economy of nations, society is growing more equal. In the economy of the nation, it is becoming more unequal. It would be wrong, however, to equate rising social inequality with economic decline. Increased inequality is really the result of new kinds of economic growth, the long-awaited shift to the information economy. If there is anything remarkable about the transformation of the U.S. economy, it's how poorly prepared the nation is to deal with it. America, What Went Wrong is a collection of newspaper articles by Donald L. Bartlett and James B. Steele, both of whom are veteran investigative reporters at the Philadelphia Inquirer, raised valid concerns about global social inequality. Bartlett and Steele's claim of a sharp rise in social inequality during the 1980s is certainly borne out by the data. The decade saw the first substantial increase in income and wealth differentials since the egalitarian remake of American society in the 1930s and 40s, when New Deal policies and wartime taxation flattened the distribution income. Yes, the New Deal is an idea that was done up in the 1930s and 40s in the wake of the Great Depression. And we also have this current New Deal as part of a modern uh, economic policy, something another. Something. There's something called a New Deal, a New Deal, or a Green New Deal, or whatever. Maybe we'll go over that in another video. But for now, it's interesting to know that there was a New Deal in the 30s and there's a New Deal currently. And does this have something to do with economic restructuring or resetting of a financial system? The richest 1% of families appear to have accounted for 70% of the increase in average family income between 1977 and 1989. The richest 20% took more than 100% of the growth, while the bottom 40% lost ground. The top 1% still accounted for 44% of the average gain. By 1989, the richest 1% of American families, all of whom were millionaires at the least, owned 37% of the net worth of all American families. Some of this increased inequality was the product of bad decisions by policymakers, but it was mostly the result of deep-seated economic changes. Pressures imposed by the technological change and by global competition mean that unskilled and rich countries can earn no more than the unskilled and poor countries. Last thing we want to look at is an article from December of 2021 by Reuters titled Pandemic Boosts Super Rich Share of Global Wealth. The share of household wealth owned by billionaires has risen by a record amount during the pandemic, with millionaires also coming out of COVID-19 ahead. World Inequality Report estimated that billionaires this year collectively own 3.5% of global household wealth, up from slightly above 2% at the start of the pandemic in early 2020. I would argue that this number is higher than actually reported. COVID crisis has exacerbated inequalities between the very wealthy and the rest of the population. Rich economies use massive fiscal support to mitigate the sharp rise in poverty seen elsewhere. Since wealth is a major source of future economic gains and increasingly of power and influence, this presages further increases in inequality. This presages further increase in inequality. Extreme concentration of economic power in the hands of a very small minority of the super rich. Forbes' annual World Billionaires list this year included a record-breaking 2,755 billionaires with a combined worth of 13.1 trillion, up from 8 trillion last year. The new report showed that a wider group of 520,000 adults who make up the 0.01% richest together saw their share of global wealth hit 11% this year, up from 10% the year before, and probably up a percent from the year before that. It seems to be an upward moving trajectory in the case of the 1%'s wealth gains. Belonging to the top 0.01% category meant having household wealth of at least 16.7 million euros or $19 million. Analysts say that some super rich have benefited from the shift online of much of the world's economy during lockdowns, while others simply gain from the rising asset prices as financial markets bet on the speed and shape of the global recovery. While poverty increased sharply in countries with weaker welfare coverage, massive government support in the United States and Europe was able to mitigate at least some of that impact on lower earners there. This shows the importance of social states in the fight against poverty. Separately, it welcomed this year's deal on global minimum corporation tax rate of 15% as a possible milestone in efforts to halt a race to the bottom, which since the mid 1980s has led to a halving of the average company tax rates to around 24%. However, it said the agreement was flawed because the 15% floor was lower than what average earners pay in high-income current countries and because it offered carve-outs and opaque arbitration possibilities to many of the companies affected.